Learning to use foundational mixing tools like EQ and compression is a must for any mixing engineer. But the mistake I see engineers make time and time again is to only learn how to operate these tools without understanding how to truly listen to them and comprehend their impact on the audio they're applied to. That's why I want to explain how you can learn this process, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll grasp what took me years of trial and error in just 10 minutes. So to do this, I'll be breaking this video down into two parts. The first part will cover how to hear and conceptualize different areas of distinct sound sources, so that within a matter of seconds, you'll be able to quickly know what frequency areas will need adjusting. The second part will be a listening exercise you can use to help further develop and improve your ear so that you can identify any frequency issues in a mix within an instant. But before we start, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I recommend checking out Sage Audio's Mixing and Mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 10 free mastered songs per month with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses, but more on that at the end of the video. So let's begin with learning the sound of frequency ranges on an EQ. It's one of the fundamental tools you really need to understand as a mixing engineer. I'm not going to cover how to use one and the various controls and parameters that most EQ plugins feature. There's more than enough resources out there that have already covered this topic in great detail. What I want to focus on instead is the way in which you should think about using an EQ, and how you can break down different sounds into sections to know the best way to process each one. So we're going to start out easy by listening to different frequency ranges of a full mix, and I'm going to give you words and descriptors that will help you to articulate what you're hearing, so that you can then apply these when listening and analysing your own mixes. I've loaded up my mix in this Analyzer plugin, and I'm going to solo out each of the 5 frequency ranges, then explain what you're hearing and how you can articulate this in a helpful and practical way. Starting with the subs. If you're not already, I'd recommend listening to this section on headphones or monitors, as you're going to need them for these upcoming detailed listening examples. The sub-range roughly consists of frequencies from 20 Hz to around 60 Hz. As you can hear, this is a range that contains all of the lowest frequencies in your mix. So things like the sub-content of your kick drum, the very lows of your bass track, and so on will all live here. This range is really more felt rather than heard, which is why it can be challenging to mix, because you can't accurately mix what you can't properly hear. Typically, we have lower sensitivity to low frequencies, as you can see from this graph, which shows a sharp decline between 20 and 50 Hz. To be perceived as equally loud, frequencies within this range must be significantly louder than higher frequencies. A good way to get a feel for this frequency range is to first remove the subs from my mix, and then I'll A/B this so you can hear how the weight of my mix changes.
I take a walk at night, stare at city lights. I take a walk at night, stare at city lights.
This is something that I'd recommend you try doing with your own mix and your reference mixes if you're struggling to get a correct balance of this frequency range. Analyzer plugins like Insight and Span can also be very helpful here. If you don't have the most ideal monitoring setup, referencing the low end on headphones is also another very useful idea. Positive words that are often used to describe this frequency range would be power, depth, and impact. And the negatives that come with it would be boominess, muffled, or overwhelming. After this is the bass range. This again contains a lot of similar elements to the sub area, except these are much more audible and easy to perceive. The bass frequencies of a mix extend from around 60 Hz up to 250 Hz, encompassing the lower end of the audible spectrum. This range includes the fundamental frequencies of most musical instruments, as well as the body and warmth of vocals. So this can be helpful if you're struggling to find the key of a song you're working on. Try soloing out this area to more easily hear the bass, and then you should be able to quickly work out what notes make up the foundation of your track. I usually like to load up a basic piano or bass sound, and then move this about on a piano roll until I'm matching the correct note to what I'm hearing during playback. Positive words that are often used to describe this frequency range would be richness, body, and warmth. And the negatives would be overpowering or a lack of definition, along with similar ones to the subs like boominess and muffled. Next up is the low-mid frequencies that cover a range of around 250 Hz to 500 Hz, sitting above the bass frequencies and below the mid-range. This area features a lot of overlap. Given just how many instruments can play in this range, it's one reason why A440 is commonly used as a tuning reference note across most Western music. This area is important for defining the character of many mid-range instruments. Much like with the previous range, it is common to encounter some resonant frequencies that may need to be managed. If there's too much of this frequency range in your mix, you would probably associate this as having a boxy sound quality. While too much of this can be unpleasant to listen to, these are critical frequencies in a mix, so cutting too much out will leave you with something that lacks impact and depth. As an example, listen to how this boxy sound becomes overbearing when I boost the low mids. But if I then cut more of this out, you'll hear how the overall energy of the mix starts to diminish. Positive words that are often used to describe this frequency range would be definition, presence, and fullness, and the negatives would be cluttered, dull, or a lack of clarity. Then we have the mid-range, which roughly lies from around 500 Hz to 2 kHz. This area is crucial for clarity and definition. Mid-frequencies provide articulation to the mix, allowing instruments and vocals to cut through and be heard distinctly. They contribute to the overall intelligibility of music, making lyrics and melodies clear and understandable. If you've ever struggled with vocals getting lost or drowned out in a mix, the likely culprit is an abundance of clashing frequencies in this range. This is common when mixing vocals alongside instruments like electric guitars, as they frequently fight for the same sonic space. For instance, if I find a spot in my mix where there's a lot of mid-range content all happening at once, like my chorus section, you'll be able to hear what I mean. When I boost the sides of the mix, which will bring up all the hard panned elements like guitars, you can hear how the vocal starts to get lost the more I boost this area. It's a range you'll often find takes a lot of problem solving due to the sheer amount of clashing frequencies that tend to occupy this one area. So prioritizing one or two main instruments to fill out most of this range and making use of EQ cuts, panning, and so on for the rest of your tracks will help you to retain the clarity of your mix. So positive words that are often used to describe this frequency range would be warmth, presence, and clarity, and the negatives would be muddiness, masking, and boxiness. And finally, we have the high range, which roughly covers from around 2 kHz all the way up to 20 kHz. However, within this very large range, there are a lot of smaller spots that are helpful to know and break down. For instance, the 4 to 6K area is really aggressive in sound, associated with something like the bite of a guitar. It's also very piercing in nature, so again, using a guitar as an example, this area and just below it is where you'll find a lot of those nasty resonant frequencies that are often good to duck down with a de-esser or dynamic EQ. And then further up from here, around 6 kHz to 9 kHz, is where you'll find a lot of the intelligibility and things like a vocal will exist. It's also one spot where the sibilant S sound is very prominent. But more than just vocals, you'll also find this area is helpful for emphasizing the pick attack on acoustic instruments or the click of a kick drum. And then at the very end of this area, from 9 kHz and above, you'll find the airy sound of a mix. I like to describe this as the expensive sounding frequencies. When you hear engineers use words like sparkle, airiness, detail, and so on, this is the area they're usually referring to. If I overemphasize it, you'll find that my mix starts to sound a little shrill and harsh. But cutting too much of this area leaves you with a dull, unpolished sound. So finding a nice balance where your mix sounds bright but not overly harsh is the best way to approach this area. Positive words that are often used to describe this frequency range would be airiness, sparkle, and detailed. And the negatives would be piercing, fatiguing, and harsh. Now I've gone through how to hear these different frequency ranges in a full mix, you then need to apply this idea to individual sounds, which can be a little trickier. But this is what's going to help you hear within a matter of seconds what needs to be changed about an audio source. So let's try a few exercises where I've boosted or cut one of these 5 frequency ranges, and I want you to note down which range you think is being affected, along with a descriptor for what you're hearing. Then I'll reveal the results at the end of this listening exercise. So here's example 1. And then example 2. And finally, example 3. So example 1, which was the snare drum, had this large boost in the low mids. This emphasized the fundamental frequency of the snare drum, which in turn adds a lot more weight and body to the sound. So if you guessed a boost in the low mids, you were correct. Example 2 was the acoustic guitar, which I applied a sizable high shelf cut to. So you may have noticed it sounding quite dull and muted due to the lack of high-end content, which you would normally have in this instrument. If you guessed a reduction in the high end, then you were correct. And example 3, which was the kick drum, had a very large low mid cut applied to it. And this may have been a bit more deceiving, as your ear will naturally perceive mid-range cuts like this as though you've increased the high-end frequencies. As I mentioned earlier, our ears need lower frequencies to be significantly louder in volume compared to high frequencies to perceive them as being equal in volume. Therefore, when we make these types of cuts, you'll naturally hear it as sounding brighter than before. This is because you're retaining more of the lows and highs of the signal, causing the high end to sound much louder in perceived volume. If you found that exercise helpful, I'd encourage you to do this daily on as many different sound sources as you can. The best way to help improve your ear and identify frequency ranges within sound sources is simply through practice and consistent exposure to them. It can be hard to improve your ear if you're only mixing on and off, with large gaps in between. Part of the reason why pro engineers have an advantage is because they're listening to and mixing music daily, so their ears will quickly tune in to all of these details. Fitting in a simple exercise like this on the daily, or even just a few times a week, will really help you to further develop your ear and listening skills, if you're unable to mix music as much as you'd like to. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out Sage Audio's Mixing and Mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 10 pre-mastered songs per month with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University mixing and mastering courses, which include start-to-finish walkthrough sessions for various genres and 35 multi-track sessions for hands-on practice. This platform is supported by their thriving community and tight-knit network of audio engineers. Every day, I see and hear great wins in the membership from both new and seasoned engineers, noticing a huge improvement in their mixes and masters after joining. Right now, you can join the membership with a 70% lifetime discount, bringing the cost down to just $15 per month. So join today and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.